Welcome, Campfire Crew. Let's get it on. The Man in the Bunny Suit by Anonymous. I remember one night before Easter when I was younger. I was still living with my parents, obviously. Naturally, since my younger sister and I were children, we believed in the Easter Bunny. It was late and I was really excited, so I was having trouble sleeping. I woke up around 4 a.m. and automatically noticed a strange smell, a smell of wet hay. I looked in the corner of my room only to see someone, who I later assumed was one of my parents, dressed in a cheap and dirty-looking Easter Bunny costume. I was afraid that if he saw me, he wouldn't give me any Easter eggs, so I turned to face the wall and tried to fall asleep. I was awoken by my sister the next morning, and we looked for Easter eggs. I beat my sister and found most of them, but there was one I found that didn't look like the others. I asked my mom and dad about it, but they said they didn't know where it came from. Fast forward to a few years later. I was in high school. I was with my sister at the lunch table, and we were talking about creepy things from our childhood. So, naturally, I brought up that Easter. What my sister told me next gave me chills. She told me that she remembered waking up and seeing it too, but also smelling wet hay. I never told her that story until then, and there's no way she could have known it smelled like wet hay without being awake too. We later asked our parents if they ever dressed up as the Easter Bunny, and they told us that they had never even bought a costume. It really fucking freaked us out. As if this story couldn't get any creepier, we later found out from our next-door neighbor that they saw something like this too, except that they saw the Easter Bunny outside in their backyard, staring up at them. Nobody ever figured out who the hell that guy was or where he came from. But creepy-ass Easter Bunny? Let's not meet. Easter Egg Hunt, submitted by El Grappo. When I was a kid, our church always held an Easter egg hunt the Saturday before Easter. It was for little kids, really, but some of the older kids showed up to get in on the fun, and we had a fun time knocking into each other and pushing and shoving until the parents told us to knock it off. Such was the case one egg hunt when I got into a fight with this older kid named Darby. He wasn't a total bully, but he did tease a lot of the smaller guys. I was 9 at the time, so he must have been around 12. Anyway, we're running around looking for eggs, and I see one way off the church lawn by the edge of some trees that were between the church and a creek. I didn't say anything out loud, and no one else seemed to be noticing it, so I thought I'd leave it as a best of last kind of thing, and then to use it to gloat over everyone else. I kept at it with my friends, but stopped for a second when I noticed this guy standing at the edge of the parking lot with a camera. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't a member of our church. I figured maybe he was someone's father or stepfather or whatever, and blew it off. For the next few minutes, I got this weird feeling, though. I'd stop hunting around for eggs and start looking for that guy. Every time I saw him, he was gesturing towards the creek to some kid or one of my friends, and they were basically ignoring him. Just as things were about to wrap up, I saw him kneeling next to Darby and pointing towards the creek. Darby nodded, and then the guy went over to a little girl who didn't want him around, obviously. That came out pretty fast as she started crying really loud, and he grabbed her by the arm. Someone yelled out, and the guy ran across the parking lot and disappeared into the trees on that side of the church, with a few of the dads in hot pursuit. During all the commotion, I remembered my egg down by the trees near the other crook of the creek, and I started going for it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Darby going for it too, and knew I'd really have to book it if I was going to get there before him. Either he saw it on his own or the guy told him. It turns out, it was the latter. So, we're both tearing after this stupid egg, and I had a little lead on him, and he knew it. Right as I'm going to get to it, Darby jumped through the air and tackled me. We slid toward the tree and the egg, and I slapped at it with my hand as I couldn't really grab it. Darby tried to get up, but I kicked him in the knee, and now we're just wrestling around on the ground. But after a few minutes, I realized we're actually really kind of fighting, and our dads ran over to yank us away from each other and back on our feet. Darby's dad asks what the heck we're doing, and he says something about the egg. My dad picked it up and looked puzzled. He showed it to Darby's dad, and they both frowned. It wasn't the same kind of egg as the others we'd been finding, and you could tell there was something sloshing around inside it. Our dads made me and Darby shake hands, and we all went back over to the church. We hung out with the other kids eating hot dogs and the candy that was in our other eggs, and a bunch of dads went over to the van garage. They came back, and a police car was pulling up, and that group had a big discussion before we all went home. Despite me badgering my dad all the way home, he didn't say what was in the egg. Darby's family moved about a year later, and it wasn't until I was like 16 that my dad finally told me what was going on that day. The egg was a thicker plastic than the real Easter eggs that we were using for the hunt, and that's why they knew something was wrong. Inside the egg? After the police took it, they reported back it was hydrofluoric acid. They put it together that the creeper who had been hanging around on the fringes of the event and pointing at the egg had put it there and was waiting for a kid to find it and open it. That's messed up beyond the beyond, if you ask me. They never caught the guy, and to this day no one knows who he was, and he was never seen around our town again. My Uncle, submitted by Godfather's Pizza. Some of you might not think that this is scary, but this time of year always reminds me of something that happened when I was growing up. I figured, what the hell, I'll send it in and see if you'll read it. When I was growing up, my aunt and uncle on my dad's side were two of my favorite people, and my cousin Sarah was also great. She was older than me and would babysit me and my sister when their family was in town visiting, and the parents wanted to go out. Uncle Steve was a lot of fun, too. He always bought us cool toys and sports stuff and then played with us. One time it was some board game which he thought was the greatest thing of all time. If it was a soccer or basketball, he'd get us outside for a game with my dad while my mom and aunt did what moms and aunts do. We went on camping trips together, we always got together on holidays, and I have to say, all of us together had some great times growing up. When I was 15, things took a turn. Sarah was in college down south when my Aunt Jackie had the accident. It was winter, and when she was driving home in a pretty bad snowstorm, she lost control of her vehicle at an intersection and slid on ice. Her car jumped the curb, slammed into a middle-aged woman who was standing there, and killed her on the spot. Her car also hit a light pole that came down on her car and caused massive injuries to her, and sadly, she died a week later. My uncle went into a tailspin when this happened. Obviously, he was devastated, and it took a while for him to put things back together again. He went on a serious drinking binge at the time and just couldn't get past the hurt and sadness of his love being gone. They'd been together since they were 14, and he just kind of lost his mind. Sarah did her best to help keep things together, but he was insistent that she continue her schooling when she was able. He loved her so much, too, and didn't want her to miss out on life. My dad went out to stay with him for a bit and got him back up and running, and things started to look a little sunnier in a gloomy time. But then came the lawsuit from the family of the woman. They sued my father for the death of her wife when it came out that Aunt Jackie had been at a work party before the accident and had a couple of drinks. She was by no means drunk, but there was enough evidence to prove that she was on the edge of the legal limit, and combined with her rate of speed, not being able to control the vehicle despite the conditions, the verdict was given to the family. Insurance didn't cover it. Uncle Steve was destroyed. They took everything, and he still owed on top of that. He declared bankruptcy and went back into another tailspin. We didn't hear from him for a long time, despite my dad reaching out and even going out to see him. So, this brings us to when I was 17. One night in February, Uncle Steve showed up at our farmhouse. He looked good, but kind of tired. He'd been moving around trying to find himself after all of this, and sometimes Sarah didn't even know where he was. I noticed a taxi backing out of the driveway, so I realized he didn't have a car. That's kind of important for later, and I hope all this front end will shed light on what happens in this story. I was glad to see him, but frankly, I was 17, and more than a little mired in hoops, my girlfriend, and my classes at school to have more than a happy to see him feeling. He stayed with us for a couple of days, and then my dad pulled me and my brother aside and let us know that Uncle Steve was going to stay with us for a while to get back on his feet. Dad was going to help him find some work and then get him his own place. We were pretty happy about that, because Uncle Steve had been helping us with our homework, and he was even helping me work on my car. My grandfather had recently given me his old 1972 Dodge Dart Swinger, and I was keeping it in shape and driving it to and from school and my part-time job at a record store. Not the sexiest of old cars, but I thought it was awesome. So, Uncle Steve looked for work, helped out around the house, and seemed to be relaxed and ready to start the next chapter of his life. For about a month, he'd been working for a contractor doing up blueprints for new housing builds, and it was looking like he would be expanding his role in that company. Everyone was really happy for him. One day, I was doing laundry and saw a pile on the floor in the spare bedroom he was using in the basement, and I thought I'd be a good guy and wash his clothes for him. I grabbed the stuff and took it to the machine when I noticed a pair of jeans had dark stains all over them. I took another look, and right away knew it was blood. I didn't freak out. I mean, maybe something happened at work to cause the blood to get on him, so into the wash they went. That night, he came home from work with my dad and went downstairs. I'd left the clean stuff on his bed, and the stains hadn't come out all the way, and I just left a note saying, "Sorry." He came upstairs to dinner and didn't say anything. But later that night, after I came home from studying at my girlfriend's, he caught me on the way to my room. "Did you wash my clothes?" he asked. I laughed and said yeah, and then apologized again. He immediately grabbed my arm and said, "Stay the hell out of my stuff, got it?" I was taken aback. He went from smiling and cool to wicked violent in about 0.4 seconds. I just went into my room. And this was the first thing in a chain of events that ended on Easter afternoon. Uncle Steve started to get really weird, coming and going at night and using my father's truck. I'd hear him come in at like 3 in the morning and head to the basement, but I never said anything. One evening, my girlfriend was over and we were going to binge on horror movies, and Uncle Steve asked if he could borrow my car as my parents were out. I said sure, and he took the keys and was gone for hours. I mean, so long, my girlfriend's parents had to come and get her. When I saw him the next day, he apologized and said he got caught up in a poker game with some work buddies and he just forgot the time. No big deal, I thought. 3 days later, 3 days before Easter, I was leaving work at the record store and got pulled over by the police. I didn't know what I did wrong, but they had the spotlight shining on me and told me to keep my hands on the wheel and all that stuff you see on TV. They made me get out of the car and had my hands on the hood as they frisked me, and I was going out of my head. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. They put me in a car. I told them I wasn't answering any questions until my parents got there, and they said they knew that, and they were in the process of getting them. My dad came flying out, demanding to know what was going on, and we got the skinny. A woman had been raped over the weekend and nearly killed. She was found by a jogger who got her some help, but her description of her attacker was weak. Her memory of the car, though, was spot on. It was mine. I mean, how many 72 Darts were driving around in 1993? They asked us a ton of questions right there, and then let me go with my dad, but they wanted to look over my car, which, against my wishes, my dad let them do. On the way home, I was really upset, and my dad was telling me it was going to be okay, and I blurted out, "Uncle Steve had my car on Saturday night, Dad." His eyes turned to slits and he stepped on the gas. We pulled into the house, and he told me to stay in the truck as he went inside. He came out 5 minutes later with the cordless phone in his hand, and he waved me in from the garage. Less than 10 minutes later, our house was swarming with cops, focusing mostly on the basement. Uncle Steve was gone, along with some of his stuff, but there were a lot of things there, including a box that had a few pairs of torn panties and condoms. My head was swirling around. The police asked my family all kinds of questions, as a group and one-on-one. I told them about the time I found the bloody jeans and how Uncle Steve reacted, and my brother brought up how he would leave the house and come back at weird times. They took tons of pictures and took most of Uncle Steve's stuff with my parents' permission. This seemed to take all night, and by 2 a.m. they left and told us to rest after barricading the basement bedroom and asking us to stay out of there. Uncle Steve never came back to the house. My mom decided we weren't staying there at all, and we were going to my grandparents across town for the next few days, and we'd spend Easter there. On Good Friday, the police contacted my dad and told him that we could get my car. In all of this craziness, I really just wanted my car back. The initial shock of things was wearing off. Sarah came home a complete wreck when she found out what was going on, but she decided to stay the weekend with us. My dad and I went and got my car and went back to my grandparents after I picked up my girlfriend. I hadn't seen her since that last weekend and had only told her a little bit about what was going on over the phone. My dad was constantly taking calls from the police, and the creep factor came back into things. Easter Sunday dawned, and we were all getting ready for church when I looked out the front window of my grandparents' house. I'd been sleeping in the living room with my brother, and I saw that my car was not in the driveway. I ran for my dad, who was in the shower. He jumped out, and of course he immediately called the police. The family went to church while he and I stayed to talk to the police about this, but they wouldn't or couldn't say what they had been working on. Around noon, we found out. They found my car. It was in a supermarket parking lot, crashed into the side of it, but still running. Why? Well, because the police had been chasing the driver, my Uncle Steve. He'd made a set of keys and snuck over to my grandparents in the night and taken it hoping to get out of town. But like an idiot, he stayed in town long enough for a cop in a patrol car to see him, identify him, and then radio it in. They obviously had the description of my car, too. Holy cat shit, this is long. Alright, here's what happened. My Uncle Steve had some problems. When he was traveling around after my aunt's death, he started raping random women in whatever town he was in. There were 5 in all before he came to live with us. The authorities pieced all of that together after a lengthy investigation. In our town, he raped 2 women. One woman was a lady he picked up in a bar and drove her to a nearby park. We got her out of the car for a walk in the woods. The other woman he had attacked never got a good look at him because he wore a ski mask. But with this woman that he drove to the park, she was so drunk she couldn't remember him clearly, but the car was crystal clear in her memory. He choked her and left her for dead, but he hadn't gone all the way, and that's when the jogger found her. When Uncle Steve had heard that I had gotten pulled over, he got an idea of what was going on, and when my dad came out to get me from the police, he got some of his stuff and left. He stayed locked in a motel room for the next few days before thinking he could steal my car on Easter and that there wouldn't be so many people out and about that morning. He'd make a clean getaway and ditch the car later. How did he know we were at my grandparents'? As he was leaving our house, we were just pulling up, so he hid in a space underneath a bay window of our living room. It was a secret hiding place I think I showed him when I was a kid on one of his visits. So, he overheard a lot of stuff going on, and that piece of information was one of them. Anyway, back to Easter Sunday. Uncle Steve was getting pulled over, so he gunned it and led the police on a chase to the supermarket. Thinking that he could lose them in the parking lot there, he missed a turn, crashed my car, got out and ran for a bridge over train tracks that was right next door to the parking lot. The police gave chase, but midway across the bridge, Uncle Steve stopped and ended things for good. He jumped over to the side, and that was that. It was at least 80 feet down. So, yeah, that was not an easy time at all, and an Easter I'd rather forget. The thing is, they knew he was connected to the 7 rapes, but how many others had he maybe gotten away with where there was no connection? He was on the road for so long, I shudder to think what kinds of things he did out there. I'm a grown man now, with almost grown children, and the memory of this still bothers me. If anyone's wondering, my grandfather and I fixed up the dart. I still have it, and I'm giving it to my son for his graduation. The moral of this story is exactly what you say at the end of every video. The craziest stuff can happen anywhere to anyone by anyone. So this truly is a you really never know the guy next door story. Uncle Steve was always such a loving and wonderful father, husband, brother, and uncle. But then again, and again I shudder to think, maybe he really was this monster all along, and we just never knew it. Perhaps that's what scares me the most. Perhaps I never really knew my Uncle Steve. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. A few short Easter pieces for you. Hope you liked it. If you have a true scary story that you would like to hear on this channel, email me, unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Make sure you hit the bell for the notifications for every time I upload. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. I will do my best to follow you back. Let's have a conversation online. Also, if you would like to support this channel, please go to my website, truescarystories.net, click on support, and find out how you can become a patron of this page. Thanks to all of my patrons who are supporting the channel already. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful holiday weekend, and remember, be excellent to each other. Until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.